US President Donald Trump has said that he's aware of the conspiracy theories circulating around the sudden death of his ally, Senator Lindsey Graham, but declared that the FBI was wasting time investigating the matter.
For more than 3 decades, he walked the marble halls of Washington while keeping his private life almost entirely out of public view. Even after years of scrutiny, many questions about the senator's personal life remained unanswered. But following his death, old rumors, past allegations, and long-standing speculation resurfaced, reigniting debate over the life he lived beyond politics. From the quiet corridors of Capitol Hill to the golf courses of Florida, this is the story of the public record, the persistent rumors, and the claims that have fueled years of controversy. The private life few ever saw. For most of his decades in public office, Lindsey Graham carefully separated his political career from his personal life. While many prominent politicians regularly shared details about their spouses, families, or relationships, Graham revealed very little about his own life away from the cameras. That silence became one of the defining characteristics of his public image and, over time, also became the source of endless speculation. In his memoir, Graham briefly mentioned only a few significant relationships from earlier periods of his life. He recalled dating a woman named Debbie during his law school years and later wrote about a military judge advocate general officer named Carol. He also described a serious relationship with Sylvia, a Lufthansa flight attendant from Austria. According to Graham, their relationship became meaningful enough that he even considered proposing marriage before Sylvia eventually returned to Vienna, bringing the relationship to an end. Beyond those personal recollections, Graham rarely discussed romance publicly. He never married and consistently declined to answer questions about his private life, choosing instead to keep the focus on his work in the Senate. That decision, while entirely within his rights, created an information vacuum that fueled years of rumors and public curiosity. Following Graham's death, many of those long-standing discussions resurfaced almost immediately. Among the most widely circulated claims came from actress and author Rose, who published a lengthy social media post shortly after news of Graham's passing. In the post, titled "Eulogy for a Horny Hypocrite," Rose alleged that she had met Graham more than a decade earlier, before her gender transition, and claimed he had paid her for private encounters. Rose later explained that she only connected her former client to the senator after learning about the long-running, unverified Lady G rumors that had circulated online for years. She also said she chose to speak publicly because she believed Graham's public political positions conflicted with his alleged private behavior. Those allegations attracted enormous attention online, but they remain unverified. Graham never publicly addressed Rose's claims, and no independent evidence has confirmed the accusations. Yet, those were not the only stories surrounding Graham's personal life. For years, another rumor quietly circulated among political observers and online commentators. Unlike the allegations involving Rose, this story centered on the possibility of a long-term romantic relationship with an unidentified woman whose existence has never been confirmed. No name has ever been publicly identified. No photographs have surfaced. No official records, correspondence, or first-hand documentation have ever verified that such a relationship existed. Supporters of the theory claimed Graham maintained an exceptionally private relationship that remained deliberately hidden throughout his political career. According to the rumor, the arrangement relied on extraordinary discretion, with private meetings, careful scheduling, and complete separation from his public responsibilities. Some versions of the story even described coded communication, confidential travel arrangements, and years of avoiding public appearances together. However, none of those details have ever been independently verified or supported by credible evidence. If the story were true, it would have represented an extraordinary level of personal sacrifice. Sharing a relationship with one of America's most recognizable senators would likely have meant remaining permanently outside public view. There would have been no red carpet appearances, no official introductions, no public celebrations of anniversaries or holidays, and no opportunity to acknowledge the relationship openly. Every meeting would have required discretion. Every photograph could have become front-page news. Even the simplest moments together would have carried the possibility of intense public scrutiny. Whether those stories reflected reality, exaggeration, or simply decades of political folklore remains unknown. What is certain is that Graham's extraordinary privacy left many unanswered questions, allowing speculation to grow precisely because so few confirmed details were ever available. If there truly was someone who quietly shared part of his life behind closed doors, that chapter appears to have ended without ever becoming part of the public record. More than 30 years in national politics produced countless speeches, votes, and television appearances, yet the personal side of Graham's life remains one of the least understood aspects of his legacy. Perhaps that mystery will never be fully resolved. An unexpected farewell. For someone who had spent decades navigating the pressures of national politics, Lindsey Graham's final days appeared remarkably ordinary. There had been no prolonged public battle with illness, no lengthy hospitalizations, and no widespread reports suggesting that his health had significantly declined. To colleagues and political observers, he seemed to be continuing his demanding schedule much as he always had. Then, without warning, everything changed. On the evening of Saturday, July 11, 2026, Graham died at George Washington University Hospital at the age of 71, only 2 days after celebrating his birthday. Initial statements released by his congressional office described the situation only as a sudden medical emergency. A short time later, physicians confirmed the cause of death as an acute aortic dissection, a catastrophic tear in the body's primary artery associated with underlying arteriosclerotic cardiovascular disease. The news spread rapidly throughout Washington. Many lawmakers expressed disbelief because Graham had reportedly remained active in his official duties until shortly before the medical emergency occurred. Friends, colleagues, and political allies described his passing as completely unexpected. President Donald Trump later revealed that he had spoken with Graham shortly before his death, following the senator's return from a diplomatic trip to Ukraine. According to Trump, their conversation focused on foreign policy and proposed sanctions involving Russia. He recalled that Graham sounded a little tired but perfect, giving no indication that a life-threatening medical crisis was only hours away. As news organizations reported the senator's passing, tributes arrived from across the political spectrum. Fellow senators, former presidents, foreign leaders, military officials, and longtime friends reflected on Graham's decades of public service and his influential role in shaping American foreign policy. Flags were lowered. Memorial statements filled television broadcasts. Political leaders remembered both his legislative accomplishments and his decades of service to South Carolina. Yet amid those highly public expressions of grief, another, far quieter question resurfaced. If Graham truly had shared his life privately with someone outside public view, what would that person's experience have been during those final days? There is no evidence confirming that such a relationship ever existed. Nevertheless, the speculation that had surrounded Graham for years naturally returned following his death. If such an individual had existed, they would likely have remained invisible even during the mourning process. There would have been no official acknowledgement from family members, no place beside relatives during memorial services, no opportunity to publicly grieve alongside colleagues, friends, or political leaders. Any sorrow would have remained deeply personal and entirely out of public sight. While the nation watched official ceremonies and listened to tributes honoring Graham's political legacy, any private chapter of his life, if one existed, would have remained known only to those directly involved. In the end, the senator's passing closed one chapter of American political history while leaving many personal questions unresolved. Whether those unanswered questions reflect hidden truths or decades of unsupported speculation may never be known. But Graham's remarkable commitment to protecting his private life ensured that, even after his death, much of the man behind the public office remained beyond the reach of public certainty. From small-town struggles to the national stage. Long before Lindsey Graham became one of the most recognizable figures in American politics, his story began far from the marble halls of Washington. His early years were marked not by wealth or political influence, but by long workdays, family responsibility, and personal tragedy, experiences that would shape nearly every aspect of his life. Born on July 9, 1955, in the small community of Central South Carolina, Graham grew up helping his parents operate the Sanitary Cafe, a modest combination restaurant, bar, and pool hall. The family lived in a cramped room behind the business, where work and home life blended together. From a young age, Graham learned the value of discipline, hard work, and perseverance as he helped serve customers and support the family business. Unlike many future political leaders, Graham did not come from a family with deep political connections or financial privilege. He later described himself as an average student, but one who possessed an unwavering determination to build a better future. That ambition eventually led him to become the first member of his family to attend college, an achievement that represented a significant milestone for both him and his parents. However, the greatest challenges of his life arrived while he was still a university student. While attending the University of South Carolina, Graham's mother died after battling Hodgkin lymphoma. The loss devastated the family, but an even greater tragedy followed only months later when his father suffered a fatal heart attack. At just 21 years old, Graham suddenly found himself responsible not only for completing his education, but also for raising his younger sister, Darlene. Becoming her legal guardian forced him to balance law school with the demands of caring for a family, a responsibility few young adults ever experience. Friends and colleagues have often pointed to this period as one of the defining moments of Graham's character. The experience strengthened his sense of duty, resilience, and personal responsibility, qualities that remained central throughout his political career. After graduating from law school, Graham chose military service instead of immediately pursuing politics. He entered the United States Air Force as a Judge Advocate General, commonly known as a JAG officer, serving as a military attorney responsible for legal matters involving the armed forces. His career eventually took him to Germany, where he became the Air Force's chief prosecutor in Europe. Even after launching a political career, Graham continued serving in the Air Force Reserve. During congressional recesses, he deployed to both Iraq and Afghanistan, eventually achieving the rank of colonel. His continued military service distinguished him from many of his colleagues in Congress and reinforced his long-standing reputation as a strong advocate for America's armed forces. His transition into national politics came gradually. After serving in the South Carolina House of Representatives and later in the U.S. House of Representatives, Graham gained national recognition during one of the most consequential political events of the 1990s. As one of the House managers during President Bill Clinton's impeachment proceedings in 1998, Graham played a prominent role in presenting the case before the Senate. The nationally televised proceedings introduced him to millions of Americans and elevated his profile within the Republican Party. 4 years later, he successfully ran for the United States Senate, replacing the legendary South Carolina Senator Strom Thurmond. The victory marked the beginning of what would become more than 2 decades in the Senate, where Graham steadily built a reputation as one of the chamber's most influential voices on national security and foreign affairs. Among his closest political relationships was his friendship with Arizona Senator John McCain. Together with Connecticut Senator Joe Lieberman, the three lawmakers became known throughout Washington as the Three Amigos, an informal alliance built around bipartisan cooperation on foreign policy. The trio frequently traveled together to military bases, diplomatic meetings, and international conflict zones, arguing that the United States should remain actively engaged in global affairs. For years, Graham carefully cultivated the image of a traditional Reagan-style conservative. He consistently supported a strong military, robust American leadership overseas, and an assertive foreign policy. At the same time, he occasionally broke with members of his own party by supporting bipartisan negotiations on issues such as immigration reform and climate policy. That willingness to cooperate across party lines earned praise from some observers and criticism from others. Nevertheless, it helped establish Graham as one of the Senate's most independent Republican voices. But American politics was changing rapidly. The rise of a new political movement inside the Republican Party would soon force Graham to make choices that would redefine both his career and his public image. From fierce critic to closest ally. Few political relationships in recent American history evolved as dramatically as Lindsey Graham's connection with Donald J. Trump. When Trump announced his presidential campaign in 2015, Graham was among the most outspoken Republican critics of the future president. During his own brief presidential campaign, Graham repeatedly questioned Trump's temperament and leadership style. He publicly referred to Trump as a jackass and warned that his rhetoric threatened the future of the Republican Party. He also criticized Trump's comments on immigration and race, describing them in unusually blunt language for a fellow Republican. Their rivalry soon became personal. During a campaign rally in South Carolina, Trump publicly read Graham's personal cell phone number aloud before thousands of supporters, encouraging people to contact him. The unusual incident immediately attracted national headlines. Graham responded with humor by filming himself destroying the phone. In the widely shared video, he smashed it with a golf club before setting it on fire, joking that nobody would ever reach him through that number again. At the time, few political observers believed the relationship could ever recover. Yet politics often rewards flexibility as much as conviction. Over the next several years, the Republican Party underwent a dramatic transformation as Trump's influence continued to grow. Following the death of Senator John McCain in 2018, Graham found himself without his closest political ally, while also facing a Republican Party increasingly united behind Trump. Rather than remaining a vocal critic, Graham gradually rebuilt the relationship. What initially appeared to be a pragmatic political reconciliation eventually developed into one of Washington's closest working partnerships. Much of their friendship unfolded away from public attention. The two frequently met at Trump's golf courses and private residences, where Graham became known as one of the few senators capable of offering candid advice while maintaining the president's trust. His combination of political experience, personal humor, and willingness to engage directly with Trump made him an important bridge between the White House and Senate Republicans. The partnership soon produced significant political consequences. As chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Graham oversaw some of the most consequential judicial confirmation hearings in modern American history. His role during Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh's confirmation became one of the defining moments of his Senate career. During the highly contentious hearings, Graham delivered an emotional defense of Kavanaugh that quickly spread across television and social media, solidifying his standing among Trump's supporters and reinforcing his reputation as one of the administration's most dependable congressional allies. Still, the relationship was never entirely without disagreement. Graham remained one of the Republican Party's strongest advocates for traditional American alliances overseas. He consistently supported NATO, defended military assistance to Ukraine, and urged a tougher approach toward adversaries including Iran and Russia, even when those positions occasionally differed from Trump's instincts. Following the events of January 6, 2021, Graham briefly appeared to distance himself from Trump, declaring publicly that enough is enough Many observers interpreted the statement as the end of their political alliance. Instead, their partnership gradually resumed. As Trump remained the dominant figure within the Republican Party, Graham continued serving as one of his closest congressional advisors, supporting major legislative priorities while occasionally using his personal access to advocate for different approaches on foreign policy. By the final years of his Senate career, Graham chaired the Senate Budget Committee and remained deeply involved in advancing the administration's agenda. President Trump later revealed that he had spoken with Graham only hours before the senator's sudden death, underscoring just how close their political relationship had become. The journey from outspoken opponent to trusted confidant remains one of the most remarkable political transformations in contemporary American politics. The debate that will continue. Even after his passing, Lindsey Graham's legacy continues to generate passionate debate across the political spectrum. Supporters view him as a practical strategist who understood that influence, not ideological rigidity, was the key to accomplishing meaningful change in Washington. They argue that his willingness to adapt to shifting political realities enabled him to shape judicial appointments, influence national security policy, and remain one of the Senate's most effective Republican lawmakers long after many of his contemporaries had faded from national prominence. To admirers, Graham's career demonstrated political resilience rather than inconsistency. They point to his leadership on military affairs, judicial confirmations, and foreign policy as evidence that he remained focused on achieving long-term conservative goals, even if doing so required changing political alliances. Critics, however, tell a very different story. For many opponents, Graham's decision to become one of Donald Trump's strongest allies overshadowed much of his earlier career. After spending the 2016 Republican primary arguing that Trump was unfit to serve as president, Graham later emerged as one of his most loyal defenders. To critics, that dramatic reversal represented political opportunism rather than pragmatic leadership. Graham consistently rejected that interpretation. He argued that remaining influential within the governing coalition allowed him to advance policies he believed served both his party and the country. Foreign policy remained another defining element of his legacy. Throughout decades in Congress, Graham consistently advocated for an active American role around the world. He strongly supported military operations in Iraq and Afghanistan, frequently defended NATO, promoted military assistance to allied nations, and argued that American leadership remained essential for global stability. Supporters viewed those positions as evidence of steadfast commitment to national security. Opponents often argued that he was too willing to endorse military intervention and prolonged overseas involvement. His legislative record generated similar divisions. Some conservatives criticized his willingness to negotiate bipartisan immigration reform and climate legislation, accusing him of compromising conservative principles. Others praised that same willingness to work across party lines, viewing it as evidence that Graham valued practical solutions over rigid partisanship. Ironically, many Democrats who had once applauded his bipartisan approach later criticized his leadership during the confirmation battles that helped create a durable conservative majority on the United States Supreme Court. When Graham died unexpectedly at the age of 71, reactions reflected the extraordinary breadth of his influence. President Donald Trump remembered him as one of the greatest people and senators I have ever known, and praised him as a true American patriot. Former President Joe Biden, despite decades of political disagreements, reflected warmly on their long relationship in the Senate and expressed respect for Graham's years of public service. International leaders also paid tribute. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky praised Graham for his consistent support of Ukraine and its struggle for sovereignty. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu remembered him as both a trusted friend and a steadfast supporter of Israel. Political allies, longtime rivals, military leaders, and foreign diplomats all acknowledged that Graham had left a lasting mark on American public life. Looking back across more than 3 decades in Washington, Graham's career was defined by remarkable resilience. He overcame devastating personal tragedy in early adulthood, built a distinguished military career alongside his political service, and evolved into one of the Senate's most recognizable and frequently debated figures. Whether history ultimately remembers him as a principled pragmatist who understood the realities of political power, or as a politician whose alliances shifted with changing circumstances, will likely remain a matter of debate for years to come. What is beyond dispute is that Lindsey Graham helped shape some of the defining political battles of his era. His story reflects the complexities of American politics, where convictions, relationships, and strategies often evolve over time, but where the consequences of political decisions can continue influencing the nation long after the individuals who made them are gone. Whatever judgment history ultimately delivers, Lindsey Graham's influence on American politics is unlikely to be forgotten anytime soon. Hit the subscribe button for more content like this.